All right. I'm a few minutes early, but I think everything is working well on the stream. Fingers crossed, everything goes well. How is everybody tonight? And I'll wait a few minutes for some more people to join in. I will apologize about last night with all the technical difficulties that were going on. I figured out what was going on, and it was on my my program that was being used to live stream. So it was trying to upload at like 25 megabytes per second, and my internet has an upload speed of 0.66. So that was the problem. Hello, Alessandro. Welcome to Band Nerd Hangout. Yes, we are going to talk all about saxophones tonight. And tried to last night, but technology got in the way. Hopefully, you should have a much better sound quality tonight than on any of the previous Hangouts. And hopefully it's better video quality. I am using my Blue Yeti USB microphone here, and I'm actually hooked up directly to my DSLR. Looks like we're maybe are we a hair laggy on some of the stuff? That should be there. Hello, Mariano. Alright, so we're going to talk all about saxophones tonight. I have in my hand here one of my saxophones. I've got sitting around me 5 sizes, I can't count right now. 5 sizes of saxophone, starting with my Soprano here. I've got my Alto, E-flat Alto. We'll talk at some point about the differences between E-flat and F instruments. C tenor or C melody, which I've done quite a few videos on. Got my B-flat tenor here with obligatory neck strap, which I'm sure I'll need at some point. Oh, I think I just heard a spring pop. This instrument is in the worst condition of all of them, but it's probably actually the best instrument that I've got. And finally, my big boy over here, my Bari sax. So, we will start out. Looks like we got about 6 or so people in here. We'll kind of wait till a few more people show up. Go ahead and get any questions you have about saxophones ready to go. And let me know if the video quality you're seeing is good enough, and I'm hoping it works pretty well. And just so you know, there's about a 20-second delay between when I talk and when you're going to see it. So I'm watching the live stream just like you are, but there is about a 20-second lag on that. So anything I say, you're gonna... what do I think about using I? I think I is a great letter of the alphabet, Patrick. It is one of the 5 vowels. I'm thinking, though, that you probably left off the rest of that sentence. So I just got an auto-link Supertone Master, but I can't seem to find a good ligature to fit the dang mouthpiece. Any suggestions? I am sorry on that. I can't tell you, Alessandro. I do not play on any kind of jazz mouthpieces. In fact, the closest to a jazz mouthpiece I own, believe it or not, is a Selmer C-Star. And I consider this closer to a jazz mouthpiece than a classical mouthpiece. And a lot of sax players are going to fight me on that one, but that's just personal preference there. But anyway, so let's talk. I think one of the first things to talk about is talk about saxophone in the orchestra. One of my favorite topics, and one that I have done a few videos on, and I never seem to finish video series. Okay, Patrick, what do you think about using a low B flat as opposed to a low A Bari sax? Okay, well, let's go ahead and address that before we talk about sax in the orchestra. So, my Bari sax is a Con 12M low B flat. I like this instrument. It produces a nice big warm sound. I'll play some here. But it is a low B flat instrument. I do not have a low A on here. If you are going to be a professional saxophonist in this day and age, and you're not going to be playing a lot of jazz, particularly jazz in clubs, and if you're the soloist, you have got to have a low A Bari. I play Bari sax in my local swing band, and I would say 50% of the charts we get have low A's, which is why, most of the time I actually end up sticking my my foot in the bell to lower the low B flat to low A. Now, there's not enough room here for me to try and demonstrate that. Okay, but by and large, professional player, particularly if they're going to be doing a lot of classical stuff, saxophone quartet stuff, they've got to have a low A Bari, and there's just no way around it. Okay, so we'll put Bari aside for now. What's the main difference? What's the main difference between the big band and the orchestra writing? Maybe in the orchestra it's more about doublings and the big band more about voicing. I think I'm going to hide user on this channel. So, there are quite a few differences between the playing. So I'm going to take my alto sax here. So what I have here is my, this is a 1928 or 1929 Bisher Alto, and I'm going to demonstrate between two different mouthpieces, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. So what I have here is the original mouthpiece that the instrument came from. This is a 1920s Bisher, and this is a modern Sommer C Star. And hopefully this ligature will fit on here. Yeah, it'll work. Okay, so one of the biggest differences, of course, between orchestral style and big band style is the mouthpiece you use. Now, on this instrument, I pretty much can only use this original mouthpiece. When I use a more modern mouthpiece, the intonation starts to get a little funky, and I'd rather be more in tune than have a more cutting sound. So I'm going to play just a written C scale. Okay, so that is the original Bisher mouthpiece. And this is what I would use in a classical orchestral setting. In fact, this is exactly what Sigurd Rascher would use. Almost down to the exact equipment. He would use a little bit later model alto sax, but by the same brand, and use exactly the same mouthpiece. So this is a more modern setup. This is a Selmer C Star mouthpiece, and it is a much louder, much brighter sound. And while this is still considered a classical mouthpiece, it is going to have a lot more projection. It's going to cut through a lot more. And I can play nearly twice as loud on this mouthpiece. And so I would use this in a big band setting, and I'd use this in an orchestral setting. That said, I use this in the big band setting too, because this mouthpiece just makes this instrument sound the best. And most of the stuff I'm playing when I have to get alto sax is actually from the 30s and 40s. And so all the equipment I'm using is vintage and proper to that era. But for instance, our lead alto player, I think, is using an auto link on his alto, and his volume is just incredible. He's as loud on the alto sax as the trumpet section. Granted, he's a former UNT 1 o'clock band person, so that should say a bunch there. He's a jazzer, and whereas I'm the classical guy. All right, let's see. Alessandro, how much did you get your Bari for? I know your bassoon is the only non-cheap horn, but I'm really curious of the price you get the Bari for. So this Bari sax, I bought here locally when I switched over to playing Bari sax in the swing orchestra here in town. The lead alto player I was just mentioning, he had two Bari saxes, as you do. He had a low B flat, and then this horn, and he had his main horn, which is a Selmer Mark VI. So he said, I'll sell you my old Con, $500. So I got this for $500, and then I spent quite a while doing a complete repad overhaul on it, and it still needs quite a bit of work, but plays pretty well. The big thing about this kind of saxophone is it has to have the right mouthpiece on it. So I've got two Bari sax mouthpieces, and they are quite a bit different from one another, and they're both what you would consider a classical mouthpiece. And this mouthpiece here that's much fatter. It's the only one I can play on here that will play in tune. It's a no name. I wish I knew what the brand on this mouthpiece is. It may be an old Con. They sometimes had this distinctive ring down here, but otherwise it plays really well. It's just this smooth, dark, rich sound. The only thing is it does not have a ton of projection on it, which I need in the swing band, but I don't really want to sacrifice that good vintage mouthpiece to open up. So at some point, when money's a little easier to come by, I may upgrade to a more modern Bari sax. Have this one for more mellow stuff, and then a more modern, maybe something like a Yamaha low A. But I definitely would like to have a low A Bari at some point. Okay, I think I've gotten through all the questions. Now, Alessandro, some of my instruments are. My tenor sax is actually a professional model. It is a professional model Yamaha. It's a Yamaha YTS 61. It was their first model of professional tenor sax that they produced. But that said, I did not pay a lot for it. I walked into an antique store downtown, and I paid all of $87 for it. And I have done a little bit of work on it. This key here had to be replaced, and there's a screw. This screw here had to be replaced, but otherwise, actually plays with a very nice sound. It's a little bit leaky. Okie dokie. So, with that, let's kind of go on to talking a little bit about saxophone in the orchestra, because I mentioned I was going to do that, and it's a good segue into talking about saxophone in the wind band. So, this comes up all the time on groups like Orchestration Online, where there is this big bias against saxophones in the orchestra, and everybody says they don't blend, and it's a bunch of hogwash. They absolutely blend. I can think of no better woodwind instrument for blending with the other woodwinds than the saxophone. If you think about it, the woodwind, of the woodwinds, the flute, the oboe, the clarinet, and the bassoon are designed to have as distinct of tone colors as possible. Well, if we try and put those four instruments into a choir, which is literally every piece of orchestral music that exists, we still have four distinct tone colors, and they don't blend well together. Now, a fantastic orchestrator can blend them together, but what's the secret sauce there? Well, the secret sauce is that section of four horns sitting in a row behind them. And the horns in the orchestra are the glue that will hold the woodwinds together, because the woodwinds are so disparate from one another. But it doesn't have to be the horns, because, well, the horns aren't woodwinds. They can function like it, but they aren't. But the saxophone sure can. The saxophone is really the glue that will hold your woodwind section together. Why? They are technically some of the most fluid woodwinds, much more fluid than your oboes or bassoons, as fluid and technical as your flutes. They have the same kind of volume control due to the single reed as the clarinets will, and they have that richness of sound that the double reeds have. So they have every benefit from every instrument in the woodwind family without a lot of the downsides. The downside is, of course, simple prejudice. And I seem to be getting a bunch of people here who are commenting, it looks like, from Indonesia. I wonder why that is. Yeah, saxophones are perhaps your best blending instrument. All right. I haven't had any kind of comment in a while, except for people who are spam. So if you're watching and everything's coming through, go ahead and make sure that you leave some kind of comment so I know that everything is working fine here. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. Just check a battery on the camera. All right, are we getting a lag again? Okay, I think we're good. I think we're good. All right, so let's talk saxophones as a family. Of the woodwinds, they are standardly the instruments that we see forming the most complete choir. And by choir, I mean soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. Of course, in this case, the bass we call a baritone. So, We don't see this within the flute family because flutes, by and large, don't descend into the bass register. We don't see this with the double reeds because, well, we've got two different families of instruments that make up the double reeds. We've got the bassoons and the oboes, and one doesn't ascend into the soprano, one doesn't descend down into the bass. The Bari sax guy, no, this is my Bari sax here. This is, you probably missed it earlier. This is just my con low B flat Bari 12 in. It's a Mexicon. So with the saxophones, though, we have a complete harmonic spectrum from high to low. The clarinets can do that, but they don't typically do that often in the orchestra, and they'll leave off typically the tenor voice, which would be in the clarinet section, an alto clarinet or a basset horn. Okay, let's see, I've got some questions coming in. What's my take on the B-flat bass sax? I love the sound of the bass sax. It is the saxophone I have the least experience with, though. I have played a couple of bass saxes before. One when I was at undergrad and one in grad school. Neither of them were good instruments. In fact, I wrote a piece for bass saxophone that was going to be premiered on my senior composition recital at UTA. And the day before the performance, the guy who was going to play it comes to me and said, "Brett, I've got bad news. The bell of the bass saxophone fell off." And so, yeah, we couldn't premiere that piece. Okay, Patrick asks, what do you think about having low A's on tenor, alto, and soprano saxes? I know some were made a low A. As long as the acoustics are fully worked out, I am all for all sizes of saxophone descending to at least low A. There are some sopranos now out there with low A's, and essentially what gets done is you buy a soprano sax, and typically it's usually been like a Yamaha or a Nagasawa, and you ship it off to Benedict Eppelsheim. And Eppelsheim has an aftermarket bell that he can add on, and basically they cut off the existing bell and then graft on a new one with new keywork, and now you have a soprano sax to low A. And it's really the only one of the saxophones that can be done to with any regularity. Though I guess you could do it to the Sopranino sax to extend it to a low A, which I don't have a problem with. But I have seen pictures of most of the saxophones with low A's. There are a couple of basses that have been made with low A's. Eppelsheim has made one low A bass, at least one. Kyle Worth made one low A bass. It makes sense to have a bass sax to low A, and I don't know why it hasn't been done more often. Okay, what is the worst things that you could write for saxes and we shouldn't? You know what I mean? What's the common mistakes? Okay, so this one popped up in a group today, and that is within wind band scoring, it's constant pairing of alto saxophone with horn. So putting saxophones with horns, because they just happen to share the same kind of alto register, is lazy scoring, and it shouldn't be done unless you want that specific color. Now, there are times when that specific color is wanted. There's a passage in Bizet's L'Arlésienne where the alto sax doubles horn. Granger's Lincolnshire Posy, the second movement The melody is between four horns in unison and soprano sax. And it's quite lovely. In fact, I think I'm going to try and play that melody here. I've got it queued up. I've got my book next to me. This soprano is pretty leaky, but yep, nope, not going to happen. So I'm going to not even try that. Well, I'll think of some other mistakes as we go along tonight. Venture said, I've seen a video of someone playing a B flat low A bass by Eppelsheim in Europe. The one instrument I know Eppelsheim made is it's in Seattle, I believe. So there is one here in the U.S. But they're not common. It would be interesting if one of the Chinese makers decided to extend their basses to low A. That would be interesting. All right. Patrick, don't worry about, as long as I can understand what you're saying and you're not one of these Indonesian spammers that keep coming in. That's weird. I hope no one else is seeing that because I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, so, should we go on and talk about the individual sizes of saxophone, or should we talk more about the family? Talk amongst yourselves. And while you do that, I'm going to check my camera's battery. So, since I'm using my DSLR camera tonight, I've got to frequently check the battery on it just to make sure it doesn't run out. I've got actually two batteries hooked up to it, so hopefully it's good. All right. So, Helicopter says we should go to the individual instruments. Low to high, high to low. Let's go low to high. I like low. So, let's go ahead and talk about the two low sizes I don't have. And we'll talk bass first, and then contrabass, and then anything else there. So, bass saxophone is the largest size of saxophone that's seen with any regularity, particularly in wind band music and some jazz. Have fun, Patrick. I'll see you later. This one should go up online sometime later tonight, so you can watch the whole thing. All right, I'm going to take this up because it's getting annoying. All right. So, bass saxophone is in B flat. It goes down to low A flat below the bass clef. It's essentially just a giant version of the Bari sax here that everybody should be pretty familiar with. It goes up to about here, bell quite a bit bigger. It went through a sharp decline after really about the 1930s. You don't really see it much, even into the 40s. It was really popular, though, in the 10s, 20s, and 30s. And it appeared on the jazz stage, both big band, small bands, and it appeared in concert bands. The biggest and best concert bands would have a bass saxophone in their lineup. And it was the woodwind tuba, because at that time it was the only available contrabass woodwind in the United States for wind band music. Contrabassoons were not a thing that you would see in bands. You would not see contrabass clarinets. Those instruments do not start popping up until really after 1950, and contrabassoon actually started showing up with any regularity considerably later than that. So bass sax was really the lowest woodwind you had, excepting if you would occasionally have a saxophone. And there are a few pieces, particularly from the 1920s, that you will see a saxophone part in. A couple Granger pieces and some French stuff. But other than that, bass sax is as low as you get. One of the reasons you didn't see the bass sax get used a lot is, one, it is a massive instrument. Just to go down another perfect fourth, the instrument, it has to be scaled up to a very large size. And it is a difficult instrument to play. It requires a different technique in some regards than the other saxophones. So Bari sax is super easy to play. In fact, I think this is probably the easiest saxophone to play of all of them. But bass sax, just that little bit bigger, is just super difficult to play. And it had some inherent problems. It was not a well-designed instrument. So players would not use them very often. But you would see parts for them in band music, and if you're writing a band piece in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s even, you would have a bass sax part in there. Even into the 70s, you would still see some hanging on. Alfred Reed wrote some great bass saxophone parts, and most of his stuff is 60s, 70s, and he actually worked into the late 90s and I think early 2000s, but I think by that point he had stopped using bass saxophone in his lineup. Most of the bass saxophones were American made, Kahns and Bischers. In fact, they actually were coming out of the same factory. The bodies came out of the same factory. The Kahn or Bischer or Martin or Holton would put their own keywork on it, but the bodies were all the same. So every American-made bass saxophone has the exact same body. They're all off the same tools. The French bass saxophones, like the Selmers, were incredibly expensive. And so players didn't use them very much because they're just too expensive. And to top it off, the Mark VI bass sax was not a good instrument, from what I understand. And that they only did like the Mark VI. They never did a Mark VII, and then they just went straight into the current production, which is the Super Balanced Action 80, or Super Action 80, yeah. The Super Action 80, or Series 2, I think. And so Selmer's only really done a couple production lines of bass saxes. And that's a good instrument, but not the old Mark VI. So we don't get a really good bass saxophone being made to the same quality until about 1980. And by that point, band composers have said, well, nobody's using bass saxophone, we're not going to use them anymore. And the price of these bass saxophones is like $20,000. That's about what they are today, 20 to 25. But within the last 10 years, that story has started to change some, in that there's Chinese bass saxophones being made, and the bass saxophones are being made by Benedict Eppelsheim. Eppelsheim's instruments are far superior to the Selmers, by all accounts. I have never played either a Selmer or an Eppelsheim, but mechanically and acoustically, from what I understand, they are a superior instrument, and they cost less. That is a big selling point. Better instrument, better sounding, better mechanics, costs less. Thank you, please. Now, the other thing that is helping to revive the bass saxophone are the cheaper Chinese instruments. And what's happened is the Chinese manufacturers have cloned two different models of bass saxophone. One is an older American style, and the other is the new copy of the modern production Selmer. Now, it's the modern production Selmer instruments that, from what I understand, are really superior instruments. And they play they're like 80% of what the Selmer costs for like a fifth of the price. And so you really can't beat that combination. So players are starting to get these Chinese clones of bass saxophones. And so we're seeing this resurgence of the instrument that is particularly interesting to watch. In fact, locally, I know two professional players. In fact, the principal saxophonists of both of the professional wind bands in the DFW area have both purchased these Selmer clones. And they've got them. They can use them. Yeah, hey Jared. So yeah, the Selmer copies are the Jin Bao, and I'm not sure which company is making the American copy, but from everything I understand, the American copies are not very good. I know that Music Medic for a while was trying to work with the American style copies, and they were having to go through and just completely do a redesign on it, and I think they eventually gave up because there was just too much to work with. All right, so that's bass sax. Anybody have any questions on bass sax? I wish I had one. It would be awesome. The closest I can get to bass sax right now is putting a Bari mouthpiece on my Alpha Clyde. That'll get me a funky bass sax sound, but if not, let's go ahead and move down the road one size to the contrabass sax. So when I first started doing a lot of my instrument study, there were only a handful of contrabass saxophones in the world. And I think it was somewhere between like 12 and 25. Some of, yeah, I mean, once you get to the Chinese clones, you just don't worry about the brand name anymore. Because that you can put whatever brand name you want on there. I heard that some band director sold a bass saxophone for some B-flat tubas in one of your videos. Yes. So a friend of mine was telling me that the band director at his school sold the school's bass saxophone so they could buy some student tubas to use in the brass methods class. Nobody was happy about that decision. I've heard worse stories, though, and those get into legal issues, and we're not going to deal with legal issues here on this channel. So, contrabass saxophone. Let's go there. Let's go to the big mama. So in the 90s, they were really kind of this mythical beast. You could see some pictures of them online, but hearing them was almost impossible. Most of you youngins don't know those old days where you had to go and search for pictures in books. In fact, one of the reasons I got into orchestration was my love of wind instruments and wanting to find out about the bass saxophone. And it took me forever to find a book with a picture of a bass saxophone in it. I could read about it, but actually finding a picture of one turned out to be very difficult. And the first book I ever found that had a picture of a bass saxophone was Cecil Forsyth's Orchestration. So naturally I got that book and I read it, and I fell in love with the art of orchestration. So that's kind of where that all started. Yeah, thanks, Venture. Yeah, we got lots of comments to do tonight, so we'll keep going. So contrabass saxes at one time were among the rarest of the rare. There was a time when you can only find like the old vintage buffets or Yvettes that are these giant behemoth saxes that are 6'8" and a bill the size of a toilet bowl, and the few of them still exist. There's about a dozen of them. If you go, and actually I can't tell you which instrument was used on the recording, but I'm pretty sure on my channel, the recording of The City in the Sea for saxophone ensemble was done with vintage Yvette or Buffet. And it is possible that there were two on stage because I don't know exactly how they did the performers, but both Paul Cohen was there with his instrument and Scott Robinson was there with his instrument, and they're both playing on it. And I think Dr. Cohen may have been directing that one. I don't know. I've got the personnel listing, but it's got people listed in multiple places. But at any rate, the sound of that vintage contrabass saxophone can be heard on my recording that I've got of The City in the Sea. So go check that out on there. But yeah, and then for a while, there was some kind of resurgence in the 90s with the Orsi company. And Orsi started manufacturing and marketing their contrabass saxophone, which is a much more modern instrument, a little slimmer design than the old vintage ones, in the 1990s, and it was marketed through LA Sax. And in fact, one of my friends was the designing consultant for LA Sax, and he's one of the repair techs I go to, and he did most of the work on importing and marketing those unique Orsi / LA Sax instruments into the country. And he's told me privately that he is going to sometime in the future start developing his own custom-made saxophones, and high on the list are some of like the F saxes, which I am very excited about. But contrabass, so we've got these Orsi instruments. Now, here's the thing. When you went to the LA Sax website back in the 90s, one of the first things you saw on their website was the contrabass saxophone mortgage calculator. That's right. It literally could be calculated through a mortgage, just like you would mortgage your home. You could do that with this instrument. It was about 40 grand. And so nobody was getting them because they were 40 grand. And, you know, the only woodwind instruments that go that high are some really exceptional Heckel bassoons, some Heckel contrabassoons, and flutes made out of unobtainium. And so it was priced stupidly high. And then along comes Benedict Eppelsheim in the early 2000s and says, I can design a better one. Jared, I thought they were 40. They may have gone up to 84. But, so helicopter, we're going to get to two backs here in just a second. So hold your horses. All right, so they were somewhere between 40 and 84, depending on what year you looked at that mortgage calculator. So they started out low, and I think they just kept going higher. And by the end of the production, I think they were 84. But early on, they were 40. So Eppelsheim comes along, and if you ever look at the original patent for the saxophone, and I'm going to see if it is in this book here. Don't think it is. Maybe in this one. All right, well, trying to I've got a couple books here on saxophone. I'm trying to find the original patent drawing. But the original patent drawing for the contrabass saxophone was a much more compact design. It was curled up. So Benedict Eppelsheim takes that and said, I can make that. And so what he does, though, is he takes that compact, folded up design, which is akin to a contrabassoon's design, and he makes that, but he makes it with a much smaller bore. In fact, it's the same bore size as the Bari sax, so it uses a Bari sax mouthpiece. The bell is the same size, and it's wrapped up kind of like a tuba. Well, you cross a tuba and a saxophone, you get a tubax. So, yeah, that's a brand name, by the way. It's a tubax contrabass saxophone. Now, here's the thing about those. They are extremely agile instruments, but they don't have the power that a full-size contrabass saxophone will. I've talked to Dr. Cohen several times, and he has 2 tubaxes, a full-size Eppelsheim, and then a Yvette. He has 4 contrabass saxophones. It's stupid. And I love him. And anyway, so it is a contrabass saxophone, but it is a compact instrument. It has a much smaller bore. It is not going to have the same volume and power, but it has portability and it has flexibility. After the success of that instrument, though, Eppelsheim decided he was going to go ahead and make a full-size instrument. And lo and behold, he did, and he produced the world's best contrabass saxophone, and the first one to ever go to a written low A. So much so that was this a success that Orsi and LA Sax said, "We're done. We can't compete with that," and they shuttered that into the business. And in fact, I don't even think LA Sax is even in business anymore. Orsi still is, but they've stopped the production on all the auxiliary weird instruments. So, with the Eppelsheim instrument coming online, he produces it at a price point, and someone may correct me here, but I'm thinking it's somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000, which is expensive. But you have to realize it's a handmade instrument. It's a handmade instrument that's 6'4". What doesn't Eppelsheim make the best of? Good question. I don't know necessarily how their contrabass clarinet equals to the Selmer contrabass clarinet. They're just such vastly different instruments. Otherwise, no, Eppelsheim for everything. He's kind of like acoustic. He's the closest thing we have to modern Adolph Sax. Well, Eppelsheim does not make a contrabassoon. He works with Wolf in conjunction to make the contraforte, which we argue about every single live stream. And Richard and I go back and forth on that. And I like the contraforte, he doesn't. But anyway. So, yeah, contrabass saxophone. What it was in the 90s, the rarest of the rare, is now like, okay, yeah, I know a guy who has 4 of them. Yeah, and as Jared said, life goals. I've actually never even seen one. But I've had my music played on one, so there's that. But yeah, so it is becoming where an adventurous band or orchestra composer just might be able to score for a contrabass saxophone. There have been a few instances where the instrument has appeared in movie scores. I know that the original score to Cleopatra, in the 1950s, the Elizabeth Taylor movie, had a contrabass saxophone somewhere in it. Of course, at the time, it was the most expensive movie ever made, and it was a box office bomb. And believe it or not, I think Team America World Police had contrabass saxophone in it. I remember my sister had the soundtrack to that, played it in the car one time. I was like, there's a contrabass saxophone on that soundtrack. So there's that. Okay, didn't the U.S. military march contrabass saxophones around World War I era? It was probably before that, and I don't even really think it was technically the military. So my understanding is that the instruments were made around 1900, 1899, 1900, 1905, maybe up to about 1912. About a dozen were made, maybe up to 25. And some went to the military, but others went to groups like the Gilmore Band. And there's a handful of others. Whether or not they were actually marched in a parade is debatable. That said, if memory serves me correct, now don't quote me on this, don't cite me as an authoritative source. The first time they got one over here, it did go into a parade in New York City, and I think that was the last time it went on parade too. So, but don't quote me on that. That's at this point that far back, it gets really apocryphal. I do happen to know through my friend who worked for LA Sax where the first contrabass saxophone is. It is in the United States. It is in the Instrument Museum at the University of Illinois. And so they have a Yvette and Schaefer Buffet contrabass saxophone in their collection with an apogee system. And the apogee system included a bunch of extra keys on it that are not typically found on the modern instrument, including auxiliary keys for the low C sharp, B, and B flat. Fascinating system. I had one at one time, and I wish I still had it. Okay, so contrabass saxophone is today becoming more and more common. I have actually written for it in a couple of band pieces and then the one saxophone ensemble piece where it was specifically requested. Cold coffee at this point. Cold coffee. Now, sub-contrabass saxophones, we really can only talk about a couple of instruments here. There's the B-flat contrabass two-backs, which is the compact model, and that's the one that's going to be seen most common. And by saying most common, there may be 10 to 20 of them. 20 is probably a very high number. And Epplesheim has made one full-size sub-contrabass, and I think it's like 7'4" and descends to low A, which would sound G below the piano, and I want one. Yeah. But no, it's completely impractical, and you need like a moving truck to move it. I've had some communication with the guy who owns it, but after some point, it's a lot of metal to lug around, and the more compact two backs sometimes is a better option. In fact, with my piece, City in the Sea, after I had finished it and sent it off to Dr. Cohen, he wrote back and said, any chance you could add a sub-contrabass saxophone part to this? I happen to be getting one, and it should be arriving like a week before the performance. And I ended up not doing that, and I kept the piece as is. Exactly, what band nerd wouldn't want one? Well, there's quite a few in that regard. But... Okay, so let's go up the scale now. And so we've covered bass, we've covered contrabass, touched briefly on sub-contrabass. By the way, I do know one band piece that actually does call for sub contrabass saxophone. Daniel Bassford, and I talked to him years ago. Um, and I can't remember the name of the piece, but it's Daniel Bassford, uh, English composer, or British, I should say. I don't know if he's English or not, but he's British. And yeah, he scored for contrabass tubacks in there. All right, that makes me wonder whether North American marching traditions would ever accept a harmonically aggressive bass instrument like that, other than Sousa's playing at HBCU volume levels. Um, so, okay, Sousaphones in historically black colleges and universities are just distorted because the kids playing on them don't know what they're doing. Well, I do not like that huge tuba line, Sousa line sound. My opinion is you don't need more than two tubas in a band, unless there's something, just remarkable. And British brass band is probably the exception. What's my favorite song to play on the saxophone? The one I'm getting paid to play. I'd love to meet Dr. Cohen. Yeah, I've only ever really spoken to him via email and messenger. One of these days I'll get up to New York City, I guess, and I've got some sketches for a piece for him at some point that I will finish. An octo contrabass saxophone would be way too big. Well, helicopter, octo contrabass, anythings are generally too big. But yeah, Jared, a lot of that has to do with just supply and demand. There's a very little supply of contrabass saxophones. If they had been made in the same numbers as contrabass clarinets, the price would be lower. Same with contrabassoons. Contrabassoons are not made in huge numbers. I mean, within the United States, Fox has probably produced maybe five. So, Bari sax is also, I think, perhaps the most neglected and abused instrument within the woodwind section of the band, because I mean, if anybody here has ever played a Bari sax part, I mean, it's just the walkie bass line generally. But it is such a beautiful instrument, particularly in the high range. And I've got my book here, and my piece, Adagio for Winds and Organ. It's the first time I ever really started to feature Bari sax in my band writing. Well, considering it's my first band piece. We've got a question here. Off topic regarding the alto flute. If an amending my I am amending my previous comment from the flute stream. PVA does in fact have an alto. I have it because I'm in a flute sextet and our band director is working on getting a tenor. Awesome. All right. So high range Bari sax. There's a reason this instrument is called a baritone and not bass, and it's this register here. It's this upper register that I think a lot of people just really forget. Okay, so that is the first big wind band Barry sax solo that I wrote, and I quite like it. And that actually goes into the altissimo register, and I didn't do a great job playing it, mostly because I'm cramped between the couch and the table here, and the Barry sax takes up a lot of room. It goes up to high F sharp. So a good Barry sax player can just have this fantastic control in that upper range. Is that the range? Let's see. One of our Barrys can really make her horn sing, and it's incredible. Is that sweet? Is that the range wrote? I think you're being written above the staff, over C above the staff. So yeah. So I'm going C. This is written C. That's written high F. That's an altissimo G there. This Barry does not like doing anything above that G, though, and that G is really finicky. I have yet to find good altissimo fingerings on this particular instrument. Let's see, what else can I play? And then here's another solo. This is from Symphony 2. This is a much lighter solo. Going all the way down to the bottom B flat on this instrument. So it's this lovely sound that so many composers really ignore. And this thing, oh yeah, it's just the bottom sax. It's just give them the bass line, the tuba part. Yeah, it's fine. No. Give your Barry sax something to do, because I'm going to tell you right now, they're going to be a good musician if they're in the top band. They will probably have close to the same kind of technical facility that your alto and your tenor will. Big reeds and brass tend to have bigger ranges because you can excite harmonics easier. Right, yes. So there is a finite limit to how much a reed can vibrate, and it's always on the upper end. So theoretically, every reed instrument should be able to play up to the same high note, and it's somewhere around B flat 6 or C 7. A few players can go above that, but by and large, that's the physical cutoff for the vibrations for Kane. And it's the same with, I've got Leger on all of these except the soprano. Someone like Christian Omaronis is kind of a freak of nature in his ability to take the bassoon way up there. I say that I actually edited his recent book on that, and I still need to get a copy of that, actually. But yeah, theoretically, the bigger the reed instruments are, the higher they should be able to play within their respective range. All right. Anybody have any questions about Barry sax? Since we're on Barry sax, I will dispel the myth that there is no such thing as a Barry sax in F. As far as we know, none were ever made. Though my friend David, who did a lot of the work for LA Sax and Orsi, says that there's one person in Chicago who claims to have an F Barry, but he won't ever produce the instrument, so we think he's kind of a troll. So I don't know the story there, but we'll see. No. Most people tend to take that with a great deal of skepticism, but by and large, we can pretty much say that there's no Bari sax in F. That said, there are a few parts for Bari sax in F. You can find it in Strauss's Sinfonia Domestica, as well as Joseph Holbrook's Symphony Number 1. Opinions on low B flat versus low A. So it was actually one of the very first things that got commented on tonight was low B flat versus low A Baris. I am of the opinion that most saxophones need to have a low A. I have none that have a low A. But if again, as I said earlier, if you are going to be a professional Bari sax player, with very few exceptions, you've really got to have a low A in your arsenal, because the composers and arrangers just pretty much expect it nowadays. I'd say 50% of the charts I get have low A's in them, and I have to make do without them. All right. Any other Bari sax related questions before we move on to tenor? Tenor 12 miles away, right? Just going to do some checking of a couple things. Alrighty. All right. Any other Bari sax related questions before we move on to tenor? Tenor 12 miles away, right? Yeah. So, helicopter, you're right. Saxophones up until about 1900 typically only went to low B. So if you look at all the saxophone literature from the 1800s, you will not see B flats in any of those works. With maybe very few exceptions. In fact, if I wanted, I could tell you. All right. Any other? Because I have this is one dissertation right here. Well, there's a couple other articles in here that documents every use of orchestral saxophone up until about 1917, and documents the instruments used, range, rhythm, so if you look at all the saxophone literature, it is from the 1800s, you will not see B flats. There are a few errors in it, but by and large, maybe very really exceptions. But even though B flat was not a common note until about 1900 dissertation. It's one of the last things that Adolf Sax added to the instrument. So every orchestral saxophone, though there are some rumors that the original bass saxophone may have had a low rhythm. So if you look at all the saxophone literature, it is from the 1800s. You will not see B flats. There are a few errors in it, but by and large, maybe very really exceptions. Weird. I don't know. Is everything? It's one of the last things that Adolf. Oh, you know what? Documents every orchestral saxophone. Though there are some rumors that the original bass sax. Is that better? I'm betting that works now, and I think I know what happened. There shouldn't be anything else going on. Cannon and Brett, yes. Oh yeah, we're way behind. Okay, yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Somehow a second window got opened up, so that had the feed in it. Yeah. Sorry about that. Oop. Oh, technology. I'm not a technology person. Okay. So we got all that fixed. Let's go to tenor. So I've got my tenor here. I will say this right now. of all the saxophones, tenor is still the one that I don't have the strongest affinity to the tenor. Um, I don't play it very often. In fact, I don't think I've ever played tenor in any kind of ensemble. I've played. Oh, so let me go back to the low Bs since everybody was kung fu fighting. So what I was saying about the low Bs is the low Bs were not standard on the saxophone until about 1900. It's one of the very last things that Adolphe Sax added to the instrument in the late 1880s, early 1890s, and you wouldn't see them go into a real production on those until about 1900. The earliest saxophone I ever played was in 1899, Yvette and Schaefer. That instrument was an early low B flat instrument. One of these days, I would actually love to have an early saxophone that only goes to low B, just to kind of see. It's of course going to be a much lighter instrument, and those instruments all have double octave keys. So instead of the complex mechanism that you have here that has one key controlling the vent here and the vent here, you had two keys, not unlike bassoon flick keys. Which turns out when I played that instrument, altissimo was a breeze. I could just switch over to the octave key to the wrong one, and I could just keep going up into the altissimo. It was fantastic. And so I, as a bassoon player, was like, well, man, why can't I just use the double octave system? Saves, it's easier to maintain, easier to build. But it is more difficult on the one thumb key. Ooh. Okay. All right. Tenor sax. Let's play something on it. Let's see. What do I have that I can actually play out of the book? I'm not gonna play. Tenor and Bari are my favorites. I don't have much interest in the alto, maybe because in general, my general interest is weird. I like the higher and lower ones. If you're watching this stream, you're probably going to be weird. So we accept you. Okay, so let's play some Granger. And for whatever reason, the air conditioner keeps blowing the page away. All right, so this is opening of Granger's Colonial Song. Compiling the excerpts for Volume 2 of Band Orchestration, getting a lot of good tenor excerpts turned out to be somewhat challenging. Because, again, like Bari sax, composers really don't know a lot what they're doing. And in particular, I have a struggle with it. Because it's that inner voice within band writing, it doesn't get featured a lot. I mean, think about all the band music any of you have ever played, and how often is there a tenor sax solo? Very rarely. It fills in that weird tenor register of the woodwind section. If we think about it, it's the same pitch range as the tenorune, the tenor bassoon, the alto clarinet, instruments that really never caught on much in the other families, but yet for some reason in the saxophone family, in jazz, it's like, oh, hells yeah, we like this one. Now, interesting story on the development of the tenor sax. It was almost an afterthought. It was the last size that Adolphe Sax produced. he probably did not make a tenor saxophone until mid 1850s, 15 years after, or at least 10 years after the patent. No tenor saxophone was there. So he didn't think that the register needed it about as often as you have a euphonium solo when you don't have a euphonium. You better have a euphonium in a wind band. Got grouped with low brass a lot when I was a kid in band. Yeah, but the thing is, this is not a low brass instrument. And I don't like that idea of grouping low brass together. You need to group saxophones together. They are a cohesive unit, and most composers treat them as such, unless they're, composers of kiddie music. So, hey, thanks for joining us, Mariano. I'll try and have another one up next week. And I'll let you guys decide what we do next week, but I'm thinking probably low clarinets next week. So let's go back, and I'm going to play a little bit more. Let's see if I can play that excerpt there. That's Florence Schmidt's Dionysiacs, and I'm going to put it on the next strap for that. So this is basically sight reading. Oh, that was not my best playing there. Sorry, guys. Stands awfully far away, so tenor sax gets really taken up in the jazz realm, and it's from that we get this connotation of the saxophone being a jazz instrument. We don't see a lot of classical tenor playing. That said, it absolutely can be. Sergei Prokofiev, interestingly, wrote a lot for tenor saxophone in some of his orchestral works. Pieces like Lieutenant Kijé, Alexander Nevsky Cantata, and a couple of others. I think it's Romeo and Juliet Ballet. There may be one or two others where he used it. And so you see tenor sax in his works, and surprisingly, he pairs it quite often with the bassoon. So it's kind of it serves as a bridge between the bassoons and the clarinets, or the bassoons and the brass. Yeah, but even grouping low brass, it's probably better in a range around the F horns more than alto saxes are. Lazy grouping by fundamental pitch, I guess. It just sounds like lazy band directors who don't really understand how different instruments function. Thanks, 8-Bit Dude. I'll get to Soprano here in just a little bit. I've already covered Bari. We've already been going an hour and 20 minutes. Actually, speaking of which, let me double check my battery life. Says I'm still good. Awesome. I know what happened. Yeah, I switched my battery charger to the better charger. The other one wouldn't charge anymore. Aha! I solved that problem. So, tenor sax. Anybody have any questions on tenor sax? Now I'll tell you what kind of equipment I'm using. This is the Yamaha YTS-61, and the mouthpiece I'm using is actually an old Martin mouthpiece. So I'm sure when I was playing, that's not a sound that you're probably very familiar with. Am I lagging that bad? That was like 2 minutes ago. Wow. So using this mouthpiece just gives it a much warmer, darker sound that I quite like. I have one other tenor mouthpiece. It's going to have a little bit brighter sound. I'll switch to that. It's not a good mouthpiece by any regards, but give you a little idea of just a different tone color. And I haven't put this mouthpiece on in ages, so it'll be interesting to hear it even from my own standpoint. And oh, it's a much louder sound. It's much brighter, and I don't like it. Give me that dark blending sound of those old mouthpieces. I'm happy there. All right, if there's no more tenor questions, well, we can talk tenor a little bit longer, because as we should all know, there are two sizes of tenor. So this is, of course, the B flat tenor, and this is, of course, the C tenor. And C, by the way, C tenor is its proper name. C melody is just kind of a nickname. And really looking at the two, you can see how much of a difference in size there is between them. If I didn't tell you this, you'd almost think this is an alto. It's so much smaller. But it is, in fact, this is only a half step difference between the two. So, that said, let's go ahead and bring out some C tenor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over in my book here. And let's see if I can find. I have a few excerpts for C tenor in volume 2 of Band Orchestration. Sweeter than anything, what's wild? The size difference? Okay, so alright, let's see. I'm going to play a little bit of Valse Erica by Rudy Wiedoff, because it's the only major C melody solo I've got. So I've done like 3 or 4 videos on it, talking about it. One of them was just an overall review, and I don't think in that review I showed it against the B flat tenor. Mainly, I don't think I had a B flat tenor at that time. I have done a few others since then. So yeah, this is the Chinese C tenor, completely overhauled and redone by me, including a brand new octave key on it. It still needs some work. I've got to grind down a little bit on that key. But After rebuilding the instrument, though, it turns out it's really a sweet sounding instrument. That's a C major scale on the C tenor, and just for grins, I'm going to play the same sounding scale on the B flat tenor. So, to my ears, the B flat tenor is a lot huskier, it's a little bit darker, whereas the C tenor is pretty light. And as close as I can get, they have very similar setups on them, similar mouthpiece, exact same ligature. Both have Leger reeds on them. But I've talked a lot about C melody. If anybody has any questions about the C melody or C tenor, feel free to ask. It is one of my favorite saxes. The C tenor is cool. It's like the Soprano, both cool but barely used in band in the modern age. But I'm changing that in the band piece I'm writing for my high school. 8-bit, as long as you have access to the instruments and a director willing to work with it and players who are willing to play them, you can do that. But that's 3 tall orders there. You have to have the instruments. If you don't have the instruments, then it's obviously not going to work. Well, that's why I didn't like that. That mouthpiece is all chipped up. That can be thrown away almost. But yeah, sound-wise, C tenor is somewhere between the B flat tenor and the alto. In fact, my instrument tends to lean a little bit closer to alto sax. Speaking of alto, let's go to alto. The most commonly seen saxophone out there, and this is, of course, my old 1920s Bisher. Hard to compare the sound over ordinary laptop tablet mic, but I'm sure it has a nice lyrical high range. I don't have an ordinary laptop mic. I'm actually using a good quality mic on this one. So you'll just you may not hear sound. Hopefully, other people could hear a difference in sound. Jared, I don't know if it's hard rubber or not. I think this one is actually plastic, and I don't want to go messing around with that. It's not a good mouthpiece at all. It's a Veto 2. So that should tell you everything you need to know. It came with the saxophone, and it stays on a shelf. So alto sax. There's not a lot that I can really say about alto sax. It's one of those interesting things. The more common yeah, the mic right here. And that's why one of the reasons for the big crash yesterday. Because I'm using all new equipment. I've even got a good camera going, DSLR. I'm going to say that we're doing an arrangement of Slava for our band, and we're doing it solely for alto sax, alto oboe, and soprano sax, which has been going surprisingly well. Those two colors mix really well. The mixture that does not work, surprisingly, unless you have 2 phenomenal players, is soprano saxophone and flute. And the only reason that does not work well is because the 2 instruments have different tuning tendencies. So when we were doing the premiere of Maslenka's Traveler, the ending is a unison duet between soprano sax and C flute. As the soprano sax goes quieter, the pitch tends to go sharp. As the flute goes quieter, the pitch tends to go flat. So the two players were fighting against each other the whole time. In the end, they made it work, but it was incredibly treacherous during the rehearsals. And it's not a... After dealing with that mixture, it's a lovely sound, but it's not one that I want to use just because it's difficult, and it took a lot of rehearsal time on what would otherwise be a simple passage. So soprano, alto sax. So people have noted in comments earlier there were a few Selmer Mark 6s that were extended to low A. They're not uncommon. But they're not too common either. I've seen one in all my years. I never got to play it. They do add a little bit of weight. It is the saxophone that is seen most often in orchestral works. It's the saxophone that's seen most often in band works too. It's the one you'll see most solos for. Though surprisingly, solo works. When I was doing my literature survey for solos, surprisingly, most of the solos that I encountered that were in the band literature tended to be more for soprano sax, and the alto sax was much more accompaniment. And some of that is some bias from Percy Grainger. And Granger was a soprano sax advocate. Now there are two sizes of alto sax. There is one in F. I do not have an F alto sax. I have a friend who does. Maybe I can sweet talk him into letting me borrow his F alto sax for, say, a week or so. And maybe I'll lend him my Ophiclite. He lends me his F alto, and we have a trade, and I can do a video on F alto sax. I'll talk to David about that. That would be interesting. He's actually got lots of instruments that I'd love to just borrow, and I'll see what I can do and sweet talking to him on that. But the F alto sax, one step higher than this, is a much sweeter sounding instrument than the E flat alto. It occurs to me that I've not played anything on the E flat alto yet, so I'll go ahead and shove a mouthpiece on here. One of the difficulties on this instrument is that the mouthpiece that I prefer, this old Bisher mouthpiece, is really tight on this cork, whereas the modern Selmer is very loose on this cork. So I can have it corked for one mouthpiece or the other, but not both, unfortunately. Yeah, here they're a joy to play. They are absolutely a joy to play. So I played David's F alto once. I have a video somewhere of it. Not on YouTube. I should put that one on Instagram. And I played one Cono sax. And the Cono sax, oh my god. Knowing that the last one to come up for sale was listed at $100,000, I was shaking when I played it, but oh my god, it was like the most beautiful saxophone I've ever played. Just the sound-wise. Just absolutely incredible sound. Okay, so, alright, what do I got in the way of... I always loved the solos from L'Arlésienne. When I played it in orchestra back in undergrad, I so wanted to play the alto sax part, but I played oboe on that concert because we couldn't find anybody else who would play oboe. finish up that phrase. All right. You should write for Kono sax, heckelphone, and basset horn. If somebody wants to pay me to write that, sure. Right now, probably not. Though I do have a piece that I have in the works for that could be done on Kono sax that I'm going to do on right for F alto, but the possibility it'll get played on Kono sax. But yeah, that's the E flat alto. Forgive my flubs. This is not the greatest place to try to practice because I can't maneuver too easily. All right, let's move on to soprano. So this is my soprano, cheap Chinese. I paid like $150 for it or so. Curved soprano, not your typical straight soprano that you typically see. When I got it, this is actually an aftermarket neck. I found a neck that was actually appropriately curved. The other one is a semi-curved neck that is actually for like a straight soprano with a slightly bent neck. The ergonomics on this were really bad though with that. So I had to play it held out like this. And with this, just like here. I call basset horn the F alto. Yes, and that's what it is. It's a alto, clarinet, and F, and I'm not the only person to do that. The French tradition was always to call it F alto. So we see that in scores by Saxophones, who started reviving the instrument in his later years. Stravinsky calls it an F alto as well, if you look at the symphonies of wind instruments. So yeah, F alto. So anyway, soprano, the smallest commonly seen of the saxes. What was I looking at? Given that people turn high-pitched Baris into F Bari saxes, I wonder if it would be possible to convert an old high-pitch alto and F by modifying it to take a soprano mouthpiece. Jared, I don't think it is possible to turn a high-pitched Bari into an F Bari. You would literally have to change. So somebody commented on a video on the C clarinet the other day saying that, oh, you can just take an E flat clarinet and put a shorter barrel on it and make it an F clarinet. It's like, no, you have to change every proportion on the instrument 16.7%. So even if you're starting with a high pitched Bari, it's still about 12% that you'd have to do it, and I don't think that's possible. I think the people who claim to have converted an a high pitch Bari to an F Bari are full of it. That said, one of the guys that I played in the swing band with, and unfortunately he passed away last week at the age of 94, so he'd been playing a long time. Played on a 1915 tenor sax that was high pitch, that he himself converted to low pitch. It's easier to convert the instrument to low pitch. And I'm not sure exactly what all he did, but he was an accomplished instrument repair tech. And so he took this old tenor sax and converted it and then painted it white because he wanted all white instruments, because he played on a Grafton plastic alto sax that he bought new. And so he wanted all his instruments to match, so he had a white clarinet and a white tenor sax and a white alto sax. It was the Grafton. Woody. Yeah. He's going to be missed. He was the last member of the original jazz band at the University of North Texas back in 1947. So, soprano sax. As I was saying, most are straight instruments. I happen to get a curved one just because I wanted a curved one. Perhaps my next saxophone I get will be a straight soprano, and I'll be looking for a straight soprano with curved neck, keyed to high G. And it seems that high G sopranos are becoming more and more common. And I was talking with a sax doctoral candidate earlier this year, maybe even late last year, saying, yeah, soprano sax, if you're looking to buy a new soprano sax, high G keys are becoming really kind of the gold standard, and everyone is really kind of expected to look at having a high G key. And so this particular soprano is keyed up to F sharp. So this is the high F sharp key here. It operates the highest vent up here. A high G key is placed next to it. It would operate a vent about right here on it, the instrument. They are becoming pretty common on soprano saxes. Not so much on the others, just because I think it's based on essentially the neck placement. There's not room on the tenor sax to put a high G key on. Looking at the alto sax, there's not room to put a high G key on it either. But on the soprano, because of where the neck is, you can put a high G key on it pretty easily and not really distort much. So, soprano sax, let's see if I can play something. I tried playing a bit earlier, but it was not. Let's do something a little. Yeah, it's. My local music and arts has both. I tried the curve and Mariette, and it probably the strangest instrument I've ever played. Everything just felt abnormal compared to the straight or bigger horn. That could just be the Mariette. Those I've heard are highly inconsistent. All right, so I'm going to play a little bit of soprano sax here. This is Gollum from DeMay's Lord of the Rings Symphony. Let's see if I can still remember how to play this. Yeah, that's the Gollum solo, or beginning of the Gollum solo from Lord of the Rings. Hey, Ratchet. It's actually been a rough couple weeks. This is the second attempt this week at doing the stream, and then I'm not going to go into anything else, but it's been a rough couple weeks. So yeah, soprano sax. There was a long time when soprano sax was really dying out. Granger loved the soprano sax and used it frequently. In fact, Granger played the soprano sax in the Army band. Would a straight soprano sound barely different than the curved one to you? To the player, they're going to sound different. To the audience, they're not going to sound very different at all. Mostly because of just, you're going to have the sound coming back at you with the curved. Whereas with the straight, the sound's going more toward the audience. And wisdom teeth coming in, it hurts a lot. Wisdom teeth. I can't tell you what brand of soprano it is. It's Chinese. That's all I can tell you. There is no brand on it whatsoever. So, story with wisdom teeth there. Story time with Brett. When I had my wisdom teeth out the summer before my sophomore year in college, my upper wisdom teeth roots were so long that they went into my sinus cavity on both sides. And so for about 6 weeks afterwards, I had a direct hole from my mouth up into my sinus cavity. What was really cool is I could take a mouthful of water and squirt it out my nose. But it also meant I couldn't play for those 6 weeks because I couldn't keep any kind of air pressure in my mouth. I could roll, and it all went out my nose. And so I had to lay off playing anything for about 6 weeks. Luckily, it was in the summer, and I didn't have to play anything, so that helped. So, yeah, so that happens sometimes. Okay, so soprano sax. That's the B-flat soprano. Elsewhere on my channel, I do have a video about the C soprano. That was somewhat popular in the 20s. Not much else, though. There are a few pieces that call for C soprano. There's a slight tonal variation between them, kind of like between the B-flat and C tenor saxes. And there's at least one place where you can get a new C soprano. International Woodwinds has collaborated with Eppelsheim to produce a new C soprano. But that said, it is an expensive instrument because it's got the Eppelsheim name on it. It's like $3,000 or so. There was, for a time, the Aquila sax that produced the C soprano, and I have heard rumors that they may produce them again, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that. So, anybody have any other questions about soprano sax? I never finished the story about it kind of dying out and coming back really strong. So it died out pretty hard after like the 1920s. You didn't see it often. It didn't feature in jazz music until you get to about John Coltrane in the 60s. And Coltrane does My Favorite Things on soprano, and that's really where people start really paying attention to soprano again, is because Coltrane's using it while everybody else now wants to use soprano. Is the F alto the same as the mezzo-soprano sax? Yes, so mezzo-soprano sax was C.G. Kahn's brand name for the F alto. There were a few other companies that did produce an F alto in the late 1800s. Yeah, and as Helicopter and Sand say, there's also the mezzo-soprano in G that is basically an elongated soprano sax, which is a really interesting tone color. And I mention it briefly in the book. It'd be an interesting instrument to experiment with, but it's not common. It's pretty rare. Like the guy can only make like one a year or so. Okay, so as we ascend, we talk about C soprano. Of course, we now have this sopranino. Now, unfortunately, I do not have my sopranino with me. It is out on loan. I had this argument that the original patent that Sax had said it was a mezzo soprano, the sax in F. No, Adolf Sax himself never used the term mezzo soprano as far as we know. Trying to think. He did use some alternative names. For instance, this in the earliest patents was called the tenor sax, the E flat tenor, which should tell you something right away. That this instrument was always designed really more for its upper register. Of course, in French, this is always the contralto. And I'm trying to think, but I don't. Sax never used the term mezzo soprano, and we only really see the term mezzo soprano getting associated with any instrument of any kind with the advent of the CG Con F alto saxophone in 1928, 1929. And I don't know the term mezzo soprano being used for any instrument before that date. That said, we can apply the term mezzo soprano to instruments like the flutes in B flat and A, as well as the oboe d'amore, and perhaps you can also use it for like the clarinet in G. Now that is almost more really an alto voice. Okay, so sopranino sax. This is one of those that's had perhaps one of the most interesting stories, particularly within the last 10 or so years. So sopranino sax was always one of those that was considered this novelty instrument, meaning that it wasn't really taken seriously by most players. Composers didn't really talk about it much. It was just this high little sax that occasionally you saw. Adolf Sax made a few. A few still survive from him, but they weren't used often. And I even have one orchestration book that talks about all the saxes, and it mentions them, and it talks about the contrabass saxophone, and by it says rare. And then the sopranino sax, by it says very rare. So, yeah. Well, have you looked into a Discord server yet? I have not looked into a Discord server yet. It's I still don't understand the need for a Discord server, and it could be that it could be something that would be fantastic. I don't know enough about it. Would a clarinet in G also be a clarinet d'amore because it's minor third below the standard instrument? Yes. And Jared's much more the expert there. So clarinet d'amores were commonly in A flat or G. And it could be that the A flat instruments are actually just high pitched G instruments. But anyway, so yeah, my brain is starting to go, and so we're going to start wrapping it up here pretty quickly because I can't think straight anymore. Anyway, sopranino saxes, and again, mine is out on loan, were not commonly seen. You didn't see them really for jazz. You didn't see them for classical stuff until we start getting our Chinese clones. And It is interesting that the Chinese clones of the sopranino sax have probably resurrected that instrument faster than any other instrument they've ever, produced. And so I've owned actually two sopraninos. One was way years ago before I ever did anything on YouTube, and it was a Yanagasawa copy. The Yanagasawa copies are keyed up to high E. And the one I have now is a Selmer copy, and that's keyed up to high F sharp. Oh, sorry. I like to reserve the clarinet d'amore term for instruments with a curved barrel and bulbous bell. Though, Jared, those are really kind of aesthetic choices. You could argue that they don't really change the fundamental character of the instrument. So anyway, back to the sopranino story. Because it is now becoming much more commonly seen due to these Chinese instruments, and these instruments you can buy for about $500, and they're totally serviceable and easy to use. Well, performers are like, well, I want a sopranino now. And composers are to the point, it's like, okay, I can use a sopranino now. Cool. So it has gone from being one of the rarest and most uncommonly seen saxes. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, sopranino. Okay, yeah, we can deal with that. That's cool. I like that. And again, I wish I had my sopranino here to demonstrate a little bit. But again, it's out on loan to someone who's using it pretty regularly. But as we ascend the scale, we get to the piccolo sax. Now, the piccolo sax, you probably know under the brand name Soprillo. Soprillo is a brand name. If another company wanted to make an instrument in that range, they could not use the term Soprillo. It's a trademark name, so they would need to use the term piccolo. In fact, Benedict Epplesheim as much as says it's the Soprillo piccolo saxophone. Sorry, I keep looking over there. I think I've got some kind of insect that's worked its way into my house and is trying to escape somewhere. So yeah, piccolo, it's one full octave above the soprano. At this point, it is getting into the realm of nearly too small to be an effective instrument. Because it gets to that point where, this is a small instrument. The sopranino is even smaller. I can play the sopranino pretty comfortably. I don't have any problems with it. But if I go much smaller than that sopranino, your fingers start cramping up. And remember I said earlier, reed acoustics play a lot into it. There's only so high a reed instrument can play. And the piccolo sax is really getting right at that limit. So I've said before that the acoustic limit is about C6 or B flat 6 or C7, right around there. And you're not going to be able to go too much higher than that. So for instance, let's see. Why you no work? And I stopped there. The highest note I played was a written A, so sounding G, which is just about as high as the sopranino sax is going to go. And I can get a little bit of altissimo on a sopranino, but not enough to make it worth my while. All right, So yeah, the piccolo sax, the soprano sax, is an interesting idea. Yeah, hopefully that didn't hurt too bad. I mean, yeah, it's not that high. I mean, it's just an A. But all right, anybody have any other questions on saxophone? I've been talking straight for right at 2 hours. Um, my voice is starting to go. My brain's definitely long gone. But I'll stick around for probably another 15 minutes or so, answer any questions anybody has. I've gone through all the different sizes, talked history, talked usage. So, question away. Yeah. 2-hour-old coffee. Yeah. All right. So, what's my favorite? I like playing Bari. I started on Bari sax. It was my first sax. It's the one I have the most fun playing. So, I don't know. You may not have been here when I had the Bari out. I don't know if this has been asked or not, but which saxophone do you believe has the most interesting timbre? Interesting is a loaded question. There's the old Chinese proverb that says, "May you live in interesting times." And a lot of people read that as a blessing, but actually, to the Chinese, that's a curse. And so, I don't tend to. I look at each individual instrument for their individual characteristics, and not so much as their which one is the most interesting, because each one is interesting in their own way if you use it right. But all right, anybody have anything else? Anything else? And no, I do not have a bass sax. I am. What are my thoughts on the two-back? So we covered that quite a bit earlier in the video. I've never seen nor played a two-backs. From the people I know who have them, they are phenomenal works of machinery. They are easy to play. They are not going to have the same kind of power, though, as the full-sized contrabass. So, I mean, the open note of a B-flat clarinet is a semitone higher than the open note of an alto sax. Why is that? The open note of a B-flat clarinet is a G, which is going to sound an F. The open note of an alto sax is a C sharp, which sounds an E. It's a coincidence, helicopter. It's nothing more than that. I don't think you need to read too much more into it. That said, if you look more at like the German system clarinet, the German system clarinet aligns a little bit more with the fingering of the saxophone, and there you'd have a different answer, because open is the same, but thumb and one is on a clarinet That's how you finger F or high C. Just like you would on saxophone. All right. If there are no other questions, guys, I can't think of a lot else here. You know, I tried to open up with talking about orchestral saxes. I think orchestral composers need to start really incorporating saxophone if they want to really push the instrument forward. Unrelated, C trombones are not in concert pitch. They're concert pitch if you write them in concert pitch, and pretty much everybody writes them in concert pitch, so yeah, they are. I mean, the fundamental of a trombone is B flat, but it's still a concert pitch instrument unless you're in the British brass band, and they're like the only people in the world that think of trombones as a transposing instrument. So if you grow up in a British brass band tradition, you may take some umbrage there, but everybody else all around the world, trombone's a concert pitch instrument. Always has been. I mean, back to its earliest days of the sackbut era. So Trent Hamilton is a bit off base on that video, but he gets the basics right. But it is a concert pitch instrument for everybody except the British brass band. All right, so next week, Band of Music of Mexico, I don't know enough about. I was actually in a Mexican restaurant earlier this week and thinking about that very thing, though, in that, you know, I live in an area that is heavily Hispanic, and I'm thinking about music education. Is like, man, banda music is super popular in Mexico. Why is this not one of our gateways to actual band music? Why aren't we showing our students this? Said, well, you want to play banda music? Well, join the band. And I don't know if anybody's ever actually seriously looked at that approach. So that would be an interesting research topic. Next week, no, not percussion. Percussion is too heavy. Next week is probably going to be low clarinets. So all the low clarinets. No soprano clarinets, low clarinets next week. I don't have the percussion's going to be down the road, because after I finish up Volume 3, which is pretty much done, I'm just waiting on a couple more photos to come in. I'm going to take a hiatus on writing for a while. But Volume 4 will be percussion, and that's going to take a goodly while, because there's a lot to write about on percussion. But yeah, low clarinets next week. So I figure clarinets, there's so many of them, we can split that into two. Yeah, volume. Oh yeah, we'll get to brass. We will definitely get to brass, because I just finished, the last year and a half talking brass. So we may do like cornets at some point, tubas at some point. So we'll cover everything. My guess is Jared will probably do a live stream tomorrow night. Sorry about missing your Tenor live stream the other night, Jared. I was at my girlfriend's house, and we were watching The Dark Crystal. And that was more important. So, yeah. 30 seconds behind stream. Honestly, Ratchet, my stream is like close to almost 5 minutes behind where it is. So I don't even know what's going on sometimes. So, but at any rate, guys, I think that's going to be about it for tonight. If nobody has any other questions about saxophone, then we'll stop here. Start thinking of some ideas of stuff we can do. Thanks for the stream. I haven't played an acoustic wind instrument in almost 25 years, but I follow you and Jared and some others for sheer interest and inspiration for the synth virtual instrument work. So, Sweeter, are you someone who's working really pretty much just with synth and virtual instruments? That might be an interesting topic to cover. Some of the lag has to do with the equipment I'm using tonight, Ratchet, and everything is a minimum of a 20-second delay. So I am minimum of 20 seconds in the future from all of you, according to the stream anyway. Like my live stream right now still has me holding the Bari sax, and I put the Bari sax down over 2 minutes ago. So I was doing Wednesday nights, but there was a lot of people had conflicts with Wednesday, so I moved it to Thursdays. And I tried streaming yesterday, but everything in the world crashed and failed around me yesterday night. And so, yeah, so I had to move it to tonight. But I'm going to aim for Thursdays, because that seemed to be the time when most people could do it. Oh, there will be not next week, but the week after, there's going to be a special live stream. And I don't know the date. Yeah, today's Friday. I don't know the date of when it's going to be, but I'm going to have a guest on the live stream. And we're going to be doing a bunch of videos together. And we're going to be actually revisiting one of the topics we've done. I've always been focused on synths and samplers. I don't work in classical tradition, and I don't use virtual instruments in the pro media composer way, just in addition to my palette. Okay. Yeah. There's an interesting, sometimes, disconnect between composers who write for virtual instruments and performers, and it's a difficult area to traverse. But yeah, Ratchet, I will have a guest. No, it's not. I don't think it's going to be anybody you know. He's not a YouTuber. I mean, he does have some YouTube videos on there, but we're going to actually have some real unusual instruments in the house, and we'll go from there. But I won't say too much more. And I'll say this: he will have a very different accent from me, and we will have lots and lots to say on a couple of particular unusual instruments that we will actually have here. I probably won't do it here in the living room. We'll probably go back to the library to do that, just because it'll be a little easier to deal with. But so yeah, it will be focused on double reeds. Let's just leave it at that. So no, not famous. Just a working musician who happens to specialize in a couple of unusual instruments. So, but anyway, I've been talking out 2 hours and 20 minutes now. My voice is giving out. and I want a nap. So I'm going to go ahead and end it now, guys. And I think my camera is probably just about out of juice. No, surprisingly, it works. So anyway, guys, this has been fun tonight. Next week, we're going to do low clarinets. And just a reminder, the only low clarinets I'll have available at that point are going to be the alto and the bass. So anyway, if no one has any more questions, we'll go ahead and stop for the night. And I enjoy doing these. Am I still doing lessons? Yeah, if anybody wants to take lessons, I absolutely offer lessons. Just contact me, and we can arrange lessons through Skype. Unless you're local, and then we can arrange to meet in person. But I doubt you're local. But yeah. All right, guys. If there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and have a good night. And I think we're going to go make some pasta. So, anyway, I will talk to you guys later.